Welcome everyone to the Legacy Intention series of videos. And I have Richard with me today, and we're going to be exploring a topic that's of great interest to both of us. And it's around this notion of legacy and intention. And he has a wonderful perspective that he's going to share on that topic. But just before we jump into it, I just want to remind you to subscribe, ring the bell, comment, like, and share, because both Richard and I enjoy seeing the comments and then being able to respond to you. And we'll do whatever we can in the most timely manner that's possible for us as we pick up your comments and questions. And with that, like every legacy intention video that I do, I always ask the person to give their first and last name, and then a little bit about what they're up to. And I leave it open. It's not like I'm asking, what do you do? I'm just saying, what are you up to? And we get to know the person. And that's what we're going to do with Richard now. So it's over to you, Richard.
Thanks, Stephen. It's a pleasure to be here and be here with a good friend. We've been friends for a very long time, and you're precious to me. What am I up to? For the last 20 years, I've been really up to into this inner work, looking at beliefs that shape our reality, shape our lives, as well as the story, lately the shadow. But what I'm really excited about right now, after the inner dialogue and working so much with the inner dialogue, I'm really excited about moving out into groups in the outer dialogue. We have so much polarity happening in the world. And how do we collapse that polarity? It's a combination of that inner work and that insight that we can get from being with others in dialogue, reaching across the aisle, across the divide, and really respecting and understanding the other person. So I'm launching a number of dialogues, a container for a more connected conversation between people, to look at our stories in a sense of what we're creating and we're in reflection of others. That's a way to get back into the deeper work of shifting who we are, being more powerful in who we are, and coming into compassion and understanding with others in the world and working with people versus working against people and their story.
So you have a deep, rich life, if I may say that. Where is it that you sort of came from? You took a path, right? And both Richard and I have worked together over many years, so I know that path, but I think it might be of value to just hear a little bit more about how you got to be where you are. I think it's important.
That's too long a story. I don't know how to do the short version of it, but I did what most people did, is I followed my conditioning of what I should be doing to be a good boy, to be successful in the world. And I went to university, went to work for an image company. I worked for IBM for quite a number of years. But there was this voice inside of me through that says, find out who you are. I was like, go away, I'm busy with this corporate world. I don't, I want to make money. I'm supposed to do this stuff. This is how I might make my parents proud of me. This is my conditioning and my story. And at one point I reached where I couldn't do that anymore. I got into burnout. And so I had to answer that voice inside, find out who I am. So I, in rage and anger at IBM and all the things that were going out there, burnout, I quit the corporate world and went off in search of myself. I went traveling, but the travel was both outwards and inwards. And that was the best journey I could have ever made. And I had an experience in India about a year later, almost a year later after that, quitting IBM, which changed my life. So I think of this Richard before and Richard after. And I don't know that Richard from before anymore.
Yes. Well, that's what, yeah, and that's what we share a little bit, is because I was going on a 6-month trip and I came back 4 years later. And I went through a lot of different kind of things. So we share that part. But I think like a word like pivot, transition, is an aspect of your life. And can you speak to either one of those words that, and then I'm going to come back and ask you about legacy.
Yeah, there was obviously a pivot there, and a couple of pivots. I think what I came to realize there, that life is about change, and rather than hanging on to things, it's always about letting go and accepting the change that's coming along all the time. So that first change, that first surrender, that experience in India was a transformation of who I was. But since then, I've gone through many different transformations, and I help other people go through those transformations and those pivots, because things changing, and everybody knows our world is really changing right now. Everything's speeding up. The change is so fast right now that we've got to be in this world. We've constantly got to be in this place of resilience, flexibility, changing our story, updating our story. And that means going back inside again and again and again, and find the richness and the gifts that come from, you know, our reflection with this outer world to a large extent. There's always room to grow, always room to grow. And the universe, if we trust life, if we absolutely trust life, whatever's happening right now for me emotionally, in my story, in my triggers and everything else, is exactly what life is saying. Richard, time for a transformation, or transition, or a pivot here.
Yeah.
But if I hang on to where I am, all that does is create pain and suffering. So yeah, how do we move beyond that? How do we pivot or transition into another new me?
So let's transition over to legacy.
Yeah.
And what's legacy mean to you?
The word that comes up for me is really about the story we leave behind for others, we receive a legacy or story from our ancestors, from our society, which we it's like, for me, life is like a dream, an act, and Shakespeare talked about that. Life is an act, and we take on a role. There's a script given to us, a conditioning from our parents. I talked about that in my story a little bit. And there's a set, and there's a setup in the story. We're set up almost really in pain, in a wound. And there's a wound or multiple wounds that come in our childhood, and those are kind of a setup, because behind those wounds, behind that pain, that birthing of childbirth or idea birth, behind that pain is our purpose, and forms the legacy that we take forward. But unfortunately, I think this wound that drives us, that drives our legacy, is a wound. It's a separation, and it drives us forward because we're trying to fix the wound that we had in our childhood. We play this role. It's a setup, and we try to fix it on the outside, get our love we wanted, feel good enough. We don't want it. We're afraid of being scarcity and poverty, so we create great wealth to try and avoid sleeping under the Brooklyn Bridge, or whatever that story is, that pain story is for us. So this wound really drives most people's legacy and what they create. It's very, very powerful energy to fight, to get away from the things that cause us pain. But if we go in and transform and transition that story, that original wound, there's so much more capacity after that. So legacy, we can create a legacy from what I call the shadow and the wound, and that's what drives the first part of our journey. But we can become much more powerful in our story and come into our majesty and our gifts if we have the capacity to look at, examine our story, and shift the story, to pivot, to transition, to transform. That's where our power is, and a totally different legacy comes out of that.
Yeah. Well, everyone knows that there's a legacy story you're sharing because of the project that you're working on as you move into really enacting your legacy. But Richard, and there's a but there, but Richard is suggesting is that there's a legacy story coming into your legacy story as a result of your project. Am I being fair there in terms of possibility of explaining it?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean, but what comes to me is there is a legacy story that is already in my sense of reality, that it's already been recreated for you.
Yeah.
You step into a scenario, a setup. You're set up, and those setups are done through an upset, and our upsets throughout our life are continuing to look at the setup, the wound, and heal the wound to step into another story by choice. But you have choice all along the path. You have choice to stay in your wound. You have choices on where you're going with those wounds. But there is a clear story, and if we can step into the trust of life, there's nothing wrong with any of our stories. They're the role, the script, the set that was given to us. The setup is all there, and we get to play with that. And there's no wrongness about where we play with it, but there are probably more powerful, better stories that each of us could create if we're conscious of that role, examine the story, and let go of some of the things that no longer serve us. Let go of that. We don't need to continually suffer in the story. We can shift and transform out of the suffering and into the beauty of the story, and then from that place help others shift into the beauty and serve others in their story and their legacy.
It's great. And I know you mentioned it, but I just wanted, there was a little bit of like, in a sense of fine tuning that you just offered, which is so important, because the persons that I'm asking to get involved, they're 55 plus years young professionals, and they have come through and they're involved with their profession, and now they're looking at what their legacy might be. So you're offering, there is a legacy story that comes in, but you can shift that legacy story. And I believe one of the words you used earlier, and I'd like to explore a little bit more with you, you used the word surrender. How does that link to, this notion of moving in and then into a new story in terms of surrender? Or how would you use the word surrender with legacy?
Yeah, this path of surrender is a really important one for me, and probably we could talk about it, reflect on it for hours. When I talked about my original story and my experience in India, that was a complete surrender. It was born out of me in a lot of pain and despair, and I realized that I could not do anything on my own, and within that story, my mind had gone pretty much crazy, and it was a letting go of any agenda that I had, and going right through the pain, and on the other side was another story. So surrendering, how do we surrender, make our story conscious, our wound conscious? Oh, this is the wound I had, and I created a story about that these people are bad, or somebody else should be doing this, and we have these beliefs and these emotions and these triggers that continue to come back as patterns to us, and we've got the story of the fight of in our legacy and what we're fighting. If we surrender the fight, if we let, so we're in this fight with reality, fight with what's happening. It's counterintuitive. We think we have to fight against poverty as our legacy. We have to fight about injustice as our legacy. But when we're coming from the fight will always be there. The fight against cancer, the fight against wars, the reality will reflect that wound back to us as long as we're in that. So the pathway, from what I've discovered, is to stop the fight. Go into the fight, surrender the story in a sense, heal the wound, and then another level of capacity opens up and gifting opens up for us, that we can really step into our legacy with from a totally different place, from a place of love, from a place of compassion and wholeness and resilience and understanding and acceptance. It becomes a transformation into the soul story from the wound story. And it's all a soul story in a sense. It's all the act, but this is the grand climax. And it becomes through going into the pain versus fighting the pain on the outside or trying to suppress it on the inside. And that's the challenge. Is we're not taught. We all of our life we're taught to fight the wound, to fight the story. And the secret is to embrace the setup, embrace the what I call shadow, and reunite those parts of us that we've split off. Now I'm getting into a whole bunch of other stuff that we could spend hours on in terms of shadow work, but we shift the story by healing the wound, surrendering the wound and the story around it. We shift from an ego into soul. Everything else from the shadow, it becomes an ego story, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with having an ego story and pushing the world from an ego place, but it's not, in my view, not the happy ending that the soul wants, not the growth, the maturity that the soul wants. It's not. The wisdom is in the wound, opening up the wound, getting the pus out, and then there's a new reality, a new possibility that emerges to us. And we can do that at any age. It's never too late to have a healthy childhood, a good childhood. We can change the story of our interpretation, our perspective, surrender the old story and create a new story. And then from that place of healing, that wound, then a whole new story in terms of what we can create and co-create in our future. Our vision may shift, our values may subtly shift or deepen and richen, and we come into communion with others and ourselves in a very different way.
And then a word like service pops in. Then you're of service, with service kind of idea. Would that be fair?
Yeah, it shifts into service from the soul. From the wound, it's maybe more like a sacrifice. I'm the martyr. I'm trying to fix the world, and it's an ego story, and it's pushing the world. And when we heal the wound, when we shift that original story, there's a creativity which is and gifting that opens up, and a true expression of the gifts that come from the wound. It's maturity into our majesty, in a sense, and we're just from a heart place, just ready to serve the world. And that can be, doesn't have to, even though most of our life might be gone, we could be 70, 80, but that climax of that story at that point, to be in service, everything could change in a moment. The gifts, there's never a too late to step into purpose and the legacy, because that transformation that can happen in the transformation of the story of the wound, suddenly a whole new venue, a whole new story opens up, and a whole new intersection with the people in your life and including your children, grandchildren, community. There's a new wisdom that can come forth through you, or even you can just die well.
Yeah. And that's why it was important to have a conversation with you, because that point, that last couple of minutes there is so important, is that no matter where you are, what you're doing, if you're into the world of legacy, it is a way in which to truly express the gifts that you have.
Yeah.
Would that be fair?
It is. And from my view, the gift, the true expression of the gift is inside the wound. And you've been developing those gifts all of your life, from the role, the setup. They've all been giving to you, swirling around, and even in hating parts of yourself or parts of the world, you developed gifts in reaction to your wounds, to your triggers. You develop a bunch of gifts and capacities, but you're missing those other capacities that were rejected and pushed away. So now wherever we are in our life, as the wound or as the shadow is revealed to us, in that is another capacity, another gift, and you become more whole in your story and a richer offering. These ones you already have. You've developed those over your life and used them there. You've used them all your life. They, become resourceful or whatever. But there's some new ones there that are birthed in the surrender that makes your whole offering of your legacy to the world come from a very different place of service, wisdom, love, acceptance, compassion. There's another piece that most of us are still missing, and I'm still missing pieces. I'm still doing this work for myself and helping others do this work, because each piece is revealed as we step into this conscious awareness and watching. In reflection, maybe it's from the wound, maybe it's from what's happening in politics or around the medicine or around our own illness. Within that pain and suffering, there's, if we're in pain and suffering, there's probably another gift there. Surrender, go inside and grab another gift, another level of wholeness.
Great. Well, we're into the closing of this Legacy Intention video. Time flies, I know. And like all videos around Legacy Intention, I always give whoever I'm chatting with the last words. Is there anything, Richard, that you'd like to share with those who are watching this video at this point in time?
Well, I think I had lots of words already, but I'm really concerned these days about polarity and split and the story of separation, which is what we've been talking about in the last while. And how do we bring people together? So working with, I'm passionate about working with individuals, finding those wounds, those shadows, and helping them to discover, because they're not easy to see. We've been avoiding them, pushing them away out of our lives. So the mentoring around really finding that those wounds, shifting that story, doing that inner transformation. But even more so now, I'm moving into dialogues, because in reflection with others, we can go deeper. In a sense, we can get understanding, compassion in those people, especially if they're on the opposite side of polarity. So I'm bringing together people in dialogues to start exploring those polarities, those other worldviews that other people have that we're so against, pushing away. How do we bring this back? How do we change that story of separation? And this is one of the experiments I'm doing in a very open, understanding, creative container that allows us all to learn and grow together as a group. There's the inner work and being the change inside, but then practicing being the change in a group through dialogue is what I'm passionate about right now. And people can find that on my website, wisdomways.net/dialogue, spelled with a GUE versus just a G on dialogue.
Yeah, and that'll be in the show, more notes, everyone, ways in which to get a hold of Richard. So with that, thank you, Richard. I certainly so appreciate you. And I recommend everyone, if you're at this point in the video, you want to interact with Richard through what he is doing, because he is a wonderful, wonderful practitioner of what he is talking about. And I have partaked of his world, his offerings, and I so highly recommend it. So with that, Richard, thank you and take care.
Thanks, Steve.